Today is Wednesday, Yud Zayin, Menachem of Tavshin Daled. We are on the Mamar of Shehikdimu, second day of Shavuos Tavshin Yud Beis in the Sefer Mamar. Teres Menachem Sefer Mamar Tavshin Yud Aleph Tavshin Yud Beis. We are on page Shin Ches 308, chapter 7, Ois Zayin. The Rebbe explained the difference between Neshamas and Malachim, or Spheres and Spheres, that Neshamas, their very essence is godliness. That's what they are. They're entities that cleave to godliness. That's their entire identity. It's just when they come down, it's a concealed cleaving. Whereas angels are actually creatures. And they have bittul, they're nullified, to get lakait when they fulfill their shlichus, their mission down here. And that's the reason for that is because of the element of the Ein Sof aspect within the Igulim, as opposed to the Tzimtzum aspect within the Igulim. And the point being that even in Igulim, in the, as it were, circular, transcendent dimensions of godliness, they too pass through the Tzimtzum, the contraction, and therefore it has some impact on them. Of course, not as much and as deep and as all-encompassing as it does on the Yosher, on the line, on the immanent divine energy. But nevertheless, it does have some effect. So this is all insofar as the neshama is concerned, the way it's made up in its extant structure. However, there is a level of godliness which has not been touched by the Tzimtzum at all, and that too is something that the neshama could link into, and that's where we're up to, chapter 7. But in order to arrive, to reach, to come to the aspect of the infinite light where the Tzimtzum has not touched, which is specifically a reference to the infinite light which is beyond, or beyond the beyond where Hashem's will has come up. Meaning to say, it's beyond the level where Hashem's will to create worlds has come up, which means, in other words, it's a level which is beyond worlds completely, even beyond the desire for worlds. Why? So the Rebbe in the parentheses explains. Where was the Tzimtzum? The first constriction. That was, in other words, the Kabbalah says that Hashem constricted His infinite light. Which level of infinite light are we talking about? We're talking about the level of infinite light where Hashem's will for worlds has come up, where Hashem desired worlds. There's a level of Ein Sof, infinite light, right, which is even beyond that. What is that? Bechinas Baal HaRatzon, the owner of the will, as it were. So in order to reach that level, this takes place, this comes about specifically through the soul descending down here below, the godly soul, to clothe itself in the animal soul, to purify it, to refine it, to purify it and to refine it. Why? So the Rebbe explains. To explain this concept, for there are two modes of avodah, of service, of serving Hashem. There is the service of Hashem that the godly soul performs or could perform on its own, from its own perspective, without being involved in the nefesh habahamis with the animal soul. And then there is the second mode of serving Hashem, and its service of Hashem in refining the animal soul. What's the difference between these two modes of serving Hashem? The difference between them. That the service of the godly soul's service of Hashem, mitzad atzma on its own. It mainly serves Hashem according to reason and rationality. Whereas its service of Hashem in refining the animal soul, this is the idea of Mesiras Nefesh, of giving itself away to Hashem beyond reason and rationality. In other words, what is added to the godly soul through its interaction with the animal soul in serving Hashem, what's added is the element of Mesiras Nefesh, beyond reason and rationality. Why is that? Why is the Avodah of the Nefesh of the Kis, the godly soul, on its own, confined to reason and rationality, and by interacting, it's beyond? By interacting with the animal soul, it goes beyond that. For in the godly soul, from its own perspective, the idea of self-sacrifice, of giving itself completely and totally away, in other words, to go beyond itself in its truest sense, is not really possible. Why? Although we know that the godly soul is completely committed to get lakait, to Hashem, right? So what does it mean that it's not really and truly able to go beyond itself? He explains. Sharei, Mesiras Nefesh, Inyana Mesiras Ratzon. What's the idea of Mesiras Nefesh? Giving away your soul. It means giving away your will. In other words, Mesiras Nefesh doesn't necessarily mean, or doesn't only mean, dying al Kiddush Hashem. Dying to sacrifice Hashem's name. If you're forced, chas v'chalila, one is forced, God forbid, to transgress God's will, and a person gives himself away. That obviously comes from the godly soul, right? But there's another idea. What's the idea behind it? The idea behind it is Mesiras Ratzon. You give away your will. You set yourself aside. You set your will aside, and you give it away to whom? To Hashem, right? That is also where, in day-to-day Avodas Hashem, right? And even when we talk about Mesiras Nefesh, in the truest sense, it's also the idea of setting yourself aside and giving yourself away for something that's beyond you. For the Nefesh of the Kis, it's never beyond her. That's what the Nefesh of the Kis is. Shari Mesiras Nefesh and Yana Mesiras Ratzon. What's the idea of Mesiras Nefesh? Giving away your soul. It really means giving away your will, your desire, setting yourself aside for something else, for Hashem. Be'ilu Nefesh of the Kis, Ritzaino hu belakus. But when we talk about the godly soul, what is the godly soul's will? What does it desire? Godliness. Which means to say that if something opposes to godliness, that's the unnatural state for the godly soul. To the extent godly soul's connection and desire in godliness is so strong and so prevalent and so constant that even during the time of sin, this is a quote from Tanya, the godly soul remains faithful to Hashem. And what? It's in a state of golus, it's in a state of exile because of the person's misdeeds. So therefore, even when the godly soul is in a situation and in a condition that it calls out from its constriction, I call out from my pain, from my difficulty, meaning to say spiritually, it's not really truly meitzar, constriction, difficulty, pain for the godly soul in its truest sense. It's only mitzad nefesh habamis. It's only because as a result of what? Of the animal soul. But it's not the meitzar, the constriction, the difficulty, the spiritual pain of the godly soul itself. It's pain. It has pain because of the misbehavior of the animal soul. Why? Because the godly soul on its own is constantly in a state of cleaving to godliness. That is what its essence is. Is explained earlier. The difference between angels and souls. Souls are in a mode of existence. That's what they are. They're a separate entity. They exist as creatures, spiritual beings, but beings nonetheless, beings that are bottled to godliness, but beings, separate identity. Masha'enki neshamis. This is not the case when we talk about souls, the godly souls. Shemohusum hiadvekus malakus. Their very essence, their very being is an entity that cleaves to godliness. That's what they are. That's what describes the makeup of a godly soul, a being that cleaves to godliness. Why is that? Why is there this difference between an angel and a soul? That comes from where they're from their root, where they're rooted. Because angels are rooted where? In the aspect of Hashem's speech, so to speak. As we say in the davening, that with the words of Hashem, the heavens wait, with the breath of his mouth, all the hosts of the heavens were created, meaning whom? The angels. And what's speech? Speech is opposed to thought. Thought is completely internal. It's for the person himself. Speech is already the connection to the outside, right? Therefore, so speech already denotes that there's something separate outside of the person. In Beruch Nisan it means there's something kaviyochel outside of Hashem, another being. But therefore angels are in a mode of existence, a separate entity in existence. And they also have substance and form, meaning to say a body and a soul. Right? It says that the body is from, you say the Eish and you say the Mayim, from the foundational element of fire and air, Ruach and Eish. You say it's not Ruach and Eish, it's you say the Ruach and you say the Eish, right? That's the body. So in other words, there's an existence, there's an entity, spiritual entity, but an entity nonetheless. This is not the case concerning souls who are rooted in the aspect of Hashem's thought, and as mentioned, thought is for oneself. Therefore, in the way they exist, they don't exist in a form of a separate existence. They exist in a state of cleaving to godliness. That's what they are. That's what their being is. So therefore, when the soul comes down here, but Nefesh Elokis comes down below, the godly soul comes down below, and it clothes itself in the animal soul, but that desire of the godly soul, that it desires godliness, remains. It wants godliness. Therefore, the soul, the godly soul, cannot really experience the idea of Mesiras Nefesh in the truest sense. Mesiras Nefesh means giving away your will, your desire. But what does the Nefesh Elokis want? What is the Nefesh Elokis' desire? Godliness. So anything, in any situation, that's what it wants. So therefore, it can't, in other words, the point being that on its own, the godly soul can't go beyond itself. Hello. So what happens? The godly soul clothes itself in the animal soul, and it affects the idea of Mesiras Nefesh, giving away its will in whom? In the animal soul. Because what does the animal soul want? Gashmias. So when the godly soul affects the animal soul to want godliness, it affects Mesiras Nefesh, meaning Mesiras Ratzon, giving away its will in whom? In the animal soul. Because the animal soul is much lower than angels, even though they stem from where? From similar source. It says, like, for example, the Nefesh is rooted in Pnei Sheresh Merkava, right? In the celestial ox, as it were, right? So they have similar backgrounds, the animal soul and the angels, but nevertheless, the animal soul is much lower than angels. An animal soul desires what? Physicality, specifically. Which is the opposite of godliness, even though we know there's neutral gashmis. We're not talking about chas v'chalil necessarily what? It's dvarim ha'asurim, prohibited things. So it says that Rebbe, since it desires gashmis, physicality, that already poses godliness. Why? In brackets, the Rebbe says, because anything that is not holiness is considered the other side. Sitracha, right? Okay, klipas noiga, right? The translucent klipa, as it were, right? But klipa nonetheless. So it obstructs kedusha. You can work with it, But naturally, it's what? It's not kedusha. So then if it's not kedusha, then it opposes kedusha. Because and when the godly soul affects the animal soul to transform it to holiness, this is the idea of Mesiras Nefesh, giving away its will. Whose will? The animal soul's will. And who affects the animal soul to give away its will to Hashem? Giving away its natural will, to set aside its natural will and desire and attraction to physical matters, and to move that to godliness. Who affects the animal soul to do that? The godly soul. Then it goes even further and says, in this itself, in the giving away the will itself, the main Mesiras Nefesh, giving away its soul, giving away its will, is not in a manner that because of the comprehension of the godly soul that it has in godliness, that is also felt in the animal soul. So suddenly the animal soul has an appreciation for the special quality and the uniqueness and how great Kedusha is. If it is that the appreciation for godliness that the godly soul has naturally is superimposed, as it were, onto the animal soul, then it's almost like coercion. In other words, it doesn't stem from the animal soul. It's something which comes from the godly soul, which is superimposed onto the animal soul. But the animal soul, nevertheless, will remain in its egocentric state. But rather, despite the fact that the animal soul remains in its condition and its situation, which is natural. That what? That it has no association to a feeling of holiness, and as the Rebbe says in Yiddish, the animal soul does not know, does not feel what holiness is, and in that state, suddenly the animal soul experiences this discomfort, this constriction, this pain, that it doesn't feel good about its matters that it's involved in, which are the opposite of holiness. So who experiences that feeling? The animal soul. And this idea, not to feel comfortable and to feel pain from matters of physicality that are opposite kedusha, that goes against the natural tendencies of the animal soul. Why? Because the animal soul naturally does desire gashmias. This is the true idea of Mesiras Nefesh, which is transformed. The will of the Nefesh Habamis, the natural will and desires of the Nefesh Habamis and tendencies to physicality, that will and desire and attraction is transformed to Kedusha, because suddenly it doesn't feel comfortable with what? With its desire and its attraction to Gashmis, the physicality, the materialism. And who brings that about, that transformation into the animal soul? The godly soul, through the fact that the godly soul clothes itself in the animal soul. And when the godly soul affects this idea of Mesiras Nefesh, giving away its will, giving away its soul. Who? By whom? By the animal soul. This causes an elevation. Where? By whom? Also by the godly soul itself. Why? Suddenly the godly soul experiences the idea of Mesiras Nefesh, what it means to give yourself away, which the Nefesh Elokis on its own does not possess, because it constantly wants godliness. But suddenly it's working with someone or with something that doesn't come naturally to it, and it affects it. So it gains those benefits as well of that experience. Why? Because since by the power of the one who does wonders, the godly soul clothes itself in the animal soul, and becomes one with it, because naturally the godly soul and the animal soul are not natural partners to interact to such an extent, and it's only because of Hashem's tremendous power to do that it happens. So through that, through the fact that it's now fused and clothed with the animal soul, then the discomfort and the difficulty that the animal soul, spiritual anguish that the animal soul has, becomes also now the spiritual anguish of whom? Of the godly soul. It feels that pain. It's not now an external anguish. It now becomes its own personal anguish. Therefore, through the fact that the godly soul clothes itself in the animal soul, what's the innovation that comes about into the godly soul? It suddenly experiences a new phenomena, the idea of Mesiras Nefesh, giving yourself away to Hashem. And the Rebbe is going to lead in from that, of course, that through that, the godly soul reaches levels even beyond. And from that, he's going to go into the third crown. That's just a thread that goes through the Mamar. Continue tomorrow.